Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm T.K. Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We are filming again from the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center here in San Francisco, where they mentor and train entrepreneurs to get their businesses started. And it is my pleasure to welcome somebody that's very familiar with those kind of companies, and that is Dan Siciliano, who's the faculty director of the Arthur and Toni Rembe Rock Center for Corporate Governance. He's the associate dean of the Stanford Law School and the co-director of Stanford's Successful Directors College. And Dan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks very much.
So, because of your education background on working with board members, we're going to talk today about how to structure and value board education.
Sure.
And it's a tough topic because, you know, a lot of directors feel that I live this world, I don't need to be educated. So let's start by putting you in the situation. If you were the chair of a nom-gov committee, which typically has responsibility for director education, and your responsibility was to create this educated board so that they could be more effective.
Sure.
How would you go about setting up a program internally to make sure that you were getting the highest value for the time spent to educate the board?
I think it's an important question. Let's first say the thing out loud that maybe it's a little un-PC to say, which is it's actually pretty hard to get members of boards to do anything that they don't want to do, right? Because they're busy. They're very well educated, they tend to be really experienced. And so I think you're right that there's going to be a little bit of a hesitation that they don't want to waste their time. And that's a terrible thing for any board to make a board member do, is accidentally waste their time. So what I would do if I were a nom-gov chair is I would first survey the directors and say, let us assume that we want you to get some director education, whatever that might mean. What kind of education do you want? Do you want networking? Do you want cutting edge learning? Do you want something that's business strategy oriented? Do you want legal compliance? What do you want? Because I think if you start there, you're going to be much more likely able to craft something. And then I think boards ideally should adopt guidelines. They should say, we would like our board members to have this much extra time outside of the boardroom being educated. And maybe they can say as an internal goal for the board, we're going to bring in an expert every other year for 3 hours, at our retreat to, address a topic that we all think is important. And so you can kind of mix it up, and there's a bunch of different ways to do that.
Yeah, the only thing you can't do internally is it's difficult to get the peer exchanges or the networking, which we know is maybe the most valuable part, is to hear either validate that you're doing the right things with other board members or learn something new.
Yeah, I think in fact the attraction for board members is at first the idea of meeting other people who are similarly situated to validate that you're doing the things that are the best practices and just to meet other interesting folks. And if it's a well done program, in the process of doing that, they end up saying, hey, I learned some new things. This classroom part, didn't feel like a classroom and it wasn't so bad. So I think really good programs, and again, being from Stanford and to plug Stanford, there are several programs. So there's the Directors Consortium, which is a consortium of different schools in which Stanford is involved. And then there's Directors College, and there are lots of other programs. And a director might want a classroom setting, that's more Directors Consortium. They might want a big tent with lots of mingling and keynotes and panels, that's more Directors College. So again, back to that, getting from your board member what kind of education they might prefer with the assumption that they need to go get something. I think that's the way to go.
How about the issue of budget? Because a lot of directors, they come in and they say, wherever you want to go, we'll sort of fund that. Others sort of are silent on the issue, and it's always, sometimes directors are a little nervous about sort of overdoing it or going to something. I find that if somebody says, makes it clear that we'll do that. And through the interview process, that would be a great way of determining that. But also if they know that this budget is put aside and it's clear that that a board member has access to that thing, that sometimes can be helpful in the director not being shy about saying, hey, I really want to do this.
No, I think, in fact, if you're joining a board or joining another board, one of the key questions to ask as part of your diligence as a board member or prospective board member is, what's your philosophy on director education? How do you help us develop as board members? What's your onboarding orientation policy? And do you have a budget for director education? I think it is clearly a best practice that boards have an explicit budget. And this will sound like a large number, but I really don't think it is. The effective number should probably be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a year for each board member for expenses related to director education. Now, maybe one year that's bringing in outside folks to your boardroom, right? And another year it's sending directors to different education programs or some combination. But I think that budget should be treated as kind of preventive medicine. I mean, a lot of good comes from getting board members up to speed and understanding the latest of what's going on.
Yeah, a lot of them say, okay, this year we're going to be internal. Next year we want you to go out and make sure you get the networking or the peer exchange piece. There's all kinds of ways to set it up. The more communication you can do on it, though, and like to your point, the interview, I think the more valuable it is.
Yeah.
So let's segue into a second question, and that is sitting CEOs. We all know that's a very desirable position to have on your board. Those guys and gals are well sought after, to serve in those positions. They are probably the least open to the idea of spending time on education, A, because they feel they're getting plenty of it at their own board and that level, plus that gets back to time. Time is so valuable.
Yeah.
At the same time, with all the changes, and if you're going to be an effective committee member, it is difficult not to get some level of education to fulfill your director duties outside of your own company.
Yeah, I was a sitting CEO for a long time, both of a startup, and then a kind of a mid-sized company, and then a private equity-owned company. And I can tell you my experience in serving on other boards was that, first, you are surprised by what you don't know in terms of board role, not CEO role, but board role. So I think CEOs really should seek out director education. And the most important kind of mind shift that can come from that, it is very hard, in my observation of CEOs, and certainly for myself, to switch off the aggressive doer mentality, right? You're sitting in a boardroom, and as a board member, not a CEO, you're not supposed to be the one doing, or necessarily proposing, or being the first to act. And that's a very hard thing for CEOs to shut off. And I think going to director education, surrounding themselves by other independent directors who are not sitting CEOs, is a good way for them to reframe their role so that they're more constructive in the boardroom. Otherwise, the great value that CEOs bring to boards is that they have a very operational, on-the-ground mindset, which is hugely valuable if you're the management and you have that person in your boardroom. But that can kind of turn and become a disadvantage if they're too operationally oriented and can't play the role of a board member, which is not as action-oriented. So I think CEOs really do benefit more than they believe by going to director education. Yeah.
Well, you can.
I did.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say.
You can only imagine a room full of type A's
where
everybody's used to solving problems on their own. I mean, there is chemistry and culture and all that stuff that's very important, which is a great segue into the position that I want to put you for our last question.
Sure.
And I want to tap all your experience with the Directors College and all that you've been through in your personal career. And that is, I'm going to put you in charge. You're the chairman now of a company that just went public, and you have to form a board. Go through the thought process that you would go through in putting together a board, and what do you look at skill sets? I've never been a fan of just checking the boxes that you have this, but talk about how you look at chemistry, how you look at skill sets, how you look at that, and how you would develop a board that would be as effective as possible for your new company.
Yeah, I think forming boards is actually pretty difficult because we have the independence requirements. So right away, you want people who have an understanding of the industry and the space, but at the same time, they can't have been insiders. On the other hand, you have this challenge, I think, about diversity. I think diverse boards are better functioning boards. There's a lot of evidence slowly coming to the fore that that's the case. So what I would do is probably non-obvious, but I've done it wrong, and then I've done it right. And certainly the academic literature on this is pretty indicative. And it is, I don't think it's the right solution to go looking for the IT expert or the cybersecurity expert or the fill in the blank expert. Certainly you have some compliance obligations. You need a financial expert. You need some other roles. But what I would do instead is look for a certain mentality. And I think that mentality is what we now at the Rock Center tend to call cooperative skepticism. So on the one hand, you need someone who is going to get along well with others, be cooperative, be supportive of management, but has a reasonably, consistently skeptical attitude such that they can ask good questions. Not questions for pushing back on management just for that sake, but rather questions that help management do even better. And so I think what you're really looking for is a mix of people. So whether they're CFOs, a sitting CEO, retired from that industry, a mix of people from different backgrounds who are willing and able to ask good questions and good learners. I know that's obvious, but you need people who arrive at a board thinking to themselves, I know a lot, but I hardly know enough, and I want to learn a lot. I want to learn a lot from management. I want to learn from the shareholders. I want to learn from what the institutional shareholders say. I want to learn from what that short seller on our stock says. I just want to learn a lot, and then I'm going to ask questions to my management in a way that helps them think through the hard problems that are about running the business. So I think that's much better than looking for a particular skill set. Those skills evolve, and they change really fast. Right now, we're all about cybersecurity, and I think we will be for a while. But I would suggest, I'll make the prediction now, if you hired the best, bring onto your board the best cybersecurity expert ever and put them on your board, those specific skills will not be nearly as important from that person in 2 or 3 years. Because probably you'll be able to outsource that. You'll be able to hire an expert, you'll bring in someone else. So I think it's a mindset. And I don't, when I say skeptical, I don't mean aggressive or negative. I actually mean cooperatively skeptical. Kind of like you are with your, I'm not saying management as kids, but like you are with your kids, right? I mean, you ask them hard questions, not to tear them down, but to make them kind of work through stuff and think stuff through, even when you don't necessarily know the answer.
Well, Dan, there's nobody that I could invite to be on the show to deal with questions like I've given you better than you would. So I hope that our audience finds all that advice very useful. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors, Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.